She agreed to a blind date to avoid spending Christmas alone, unaware he was a Mafia boss. The silence in the apartment was heavy, the kind that pressed against the eardrums and made the hum of the refrigerator sound like a jet engine. Emma Brooks sat on her beige sofa, knees pulled up to her chest, staring at the small, pathetic Christmas tree perched on the corner of her television stand. It was barely 2 feet tall, a synthetic pine she had bought at a pharmacy on clearance 3 years ago. It had exactly 12 ornaments, and half of them were sliding off the plastic needles. She was in her late 20s, an age where the world expected her to have things figured out, or at least to have someone to figure things out with. But here she was in Riverton, a city that felt colder and grayer with every passing winter, preparing to spend Christmas Eve entirely alone. Her family had decided to stay in Florida this year, citing travel costs and her mother's arthritis, and her relationship of 2 years had ended abruptly in October. The breakup had left her with a lease she could barely afford and a hollow ache in her chest that felt particularly sharp during the holidays. Outside her window, the city was alive. Snow was beginning to dust the rooftops, and she could hear the faint sound of carols playing from a passing car. Everyone else seemed to be going somewhere. Everyone else had a destination. Emma just had a bottle of cheap wine and a queue of holiday movies she had already seen a dozen times. She dreaded the next 24 hours. She dreaded the silence. She dreaded the inevitable pity in her mother's voice when they spoke on the phone tomorrow morning. The vibration of her phone on the coffee table made her jump. It was a text from Lily. "Don't you dare go home yet. We're still at the punch bowl." Emma sighed, rubbing her temples. The office holiday party was still raging downstairs in the lobby of the design firm where she worked as a senior graphic designer. She had slipped away 20 minutes ago, pleading a headache. But Lily, her extroverted and relentlessly optimistic co-worker, was not easily deterred. Emma grabbed her coat and bag, intending to leave the building, but Lily intercepted her near the elevators. Lily was wearing a sweater that sparkled with enough sequins to blind a pilot, and her cheeks were flushed with festive cheer. "You were trying to escape," Lily accused, pointing a manicured finger at Emma. "I have a headache," Emma lied, clutching her purse strap tighter, "and a lot of wrapping to do." "You have nothing to wrap because you told me you mailed your family's gifts last week," Lily countered, crossing her arms. "Listen, Em, I am not going to let you go home and mope. You've been walking around with a rain cloud over your head for 2 months. You deserve something special." "I am fine," Emma insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "You are not fine. You are lonely, and lucky for you, I am an excellent problem solver." Lily stepped closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I set you up." Emma froze. "You did what?" "A date. Tonight, Christmas Eve." Lily beamed, looking incredibly proud of herself. Emma shook her head violently. "No, absolutely not. Lily, are you insane? Who goes on a blind date on Christmas Eve? That is the most desperate thing I have ever heard." "He's not desperate. He's just busy," Lily said, waving off Emma's protest. "He's a client of a client or something like that. My friend Sarah knows him. She said he is charming, successful, and he specifically asked if she knew anyone who wasn't looking for a chaotic party scene tonight. He wants a quiet dinner. You want to avoid crying into a bowl of popcorn. It is perfect." "I was not going to cry into popcorn," Emma defended, though she felt a flush of embarrassment because that was exactly what she had planned. Lily grabbed Emma's hands. "Please, just one drink. If he is terrible, you can leave, but think about the alternative. Do you really want to go back to that empty apartment right now?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma looked at the elevator doors, imagining the silence waiting for her upstairs. She imagined the long hours stretching until morning, the feeling of being completely invisible while the rest of the world celebrated connection and love. The fear of that isolation was sharper than the awkwardness of meeting a stranger. "Fine," Emma whispered, defeated. "But if he is weird, I am leaving immediately. He will be at Marino's at 7, Lily squealed, hugging her. "Wear the red dress, the one that makes you look like a movie star." 2 hours later, Emma stood outside the heavy oak doors of Marino's, shivering slightly in her coat. She had worn the red dress, a sleek, knee-length velvet number that hugged her curves. Paired with black heels, it felt like too much, or maybe not enough. She had checked her reflection in the rearview mirror 3 times, trying to smooth the anxiety from her expression. Marino's was one of the most upscale restaurants in Riverton, the kind of place where reservations were booked months in advance. She had no idea how Lily's friend had secured a table on Christmas Eve. As she pushed through the doors, the warmth of the restaurant rushed over her, smelling of garlic, roasting herbs, and expensive perfume. The dining room was dimly lit and intimate, decorated with tasteful garlands and soft candlelight. It was packed with couples, beautiful, happy couples holding hands across white tablecloths. Emma felt a spike of self-consciousness. She felt like an imposter, a lonely woman playing dress-up. She stepped toward the host stand, but her attention was drawn to the perimeter of the room. Near the entrance, and positioned near the kitchen doors, stood 2 men. They were not staff. They wore dark, impeccably tailored suits that strained slightly at the shoulders. They were standing perfectly still, hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the room with a detached, professional intensity. Emma assumed a local politician or a celebrity must be dining here. Riverton was not exactly Hollywood, but they had their fair share of old money and power. "I am meeting someone," Emma told the hostess, her voice trembling slightly. "His name is Adrian Costa." The hostess's eyebrows shot up, and her posture straightened instantly. "Of course. Mister, Costa's table is ready. Right this way." Emma was led to a secluded booth in the back corner, offering a full view of the room but shielded from prying eyes by high velvet partitions. The table was set for 2, but the booth was empty. Emma sat down, smoothing her dress over her thighs, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was 5 minutes early. She checked her phone. No messages. She took a sip of water, watching the candle flame flicker in its crystal holder. The 2 men in suits by the door had not moved. One of them caught her eye and nodded once, sharply, before looking away. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold went down her spine. "Sorry I am late." The voice was deep, smooth and resonant, like a cello bow drawn across the lower strings. Emma looked up and lost her breath for a second. The man standing at the edge of the booth was striking. He was tall, likely over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his charcoal overcoat. His hair was dark, styled back from a face that seemed carved from something harder than flesh. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were the color of dark espresso. He exuded a quiet, terrifying confidence. He did not look like a man who needed a blind date. He looked like a man who owned the building. "I am not late," Emma managed to say, standing up halfway before realizing she should probably stay seated, creating an awkward half-crouch. I was early." "You are right on time." He smiled, and the severity of his face transformed. It was a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Crinkling the corners, he motioned for her to sit, waiting until she was settled before sliding into the booth opposite her. "I am Adrian," he said, extending a hand across the table. His grip was warm and firm, his skin slightly rougher than she expected for someone so polished. "Emma," she replied, realizing her hand was cold and trembling. "It is a pleasure to meet you." "Emma," he signaled the waiter with a barely perceptible lift of his chin. "And might I say, you look stunning. That color suits you perfectly." "Thank you," she murmured, feeling the heat rise to her cheeks. "I felt a bit overdressed. Everyone else seems so put together." "You are the only person in this room worth looking at," he said. The compliment was delivered with such direct, matter-of-fact sincerity that Emma felt seen rather than judged. It was not a line. It sounded like an observation. The waiter appeared instantly, pouring wine and reciting specials with a nervous energy that suggested he desperately wanted to impress table 4. Adrian ordered for them both after asking her preferences with polite attentiveness, choosing a complex red wine and suggesting the sea bass. As the dinner progressed, Emma found her anxiety unspooling. Adrian Costa was an enigma. He was intensely focused on her, listening to every word she said with a stillness that was unnerving yet flattering. He did not check his phone. He did not glance around the room. His dark eyes remained fixed on her face as if she were the only puzzle he cared to solve. "So, Lily tells me you are in graphic design," Adrian said, breaking a piece of bread. "Yes," Emma said, relaxing against the plush velvet of the booth. "I work for a firm downtown, mostly branding and corporate identity. It sounds boring, but I love the psychology of it, trying to make people feel something just by looking at a shape or a color. It does not sound boring," Adrian corrected softly. "It sounds powerful. Controlling perception is an art. What about you?" Emma asked, feeling brave enough to probe. Lily was vague. She said, "You own businesses?" Adrian took a sip of his wine, his gaze momentarily dropping to the glass. "A group of businesses, logistics, shipping, some real estate holdings. My family has been in Riverton for a long time. We have our hands in a little bit of everything." "It sounds impressive," Emma said, "and busy." "It can be," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers again. "It consumes a lot of my life. That is why I am here. Actually, I realized 2 days ago that I had not spoken to anyone outside of my payroll in 3 weeks. I wanted to remember what a normal conversation felt like. Is this normal?" Emma laughed, a breathy sound. "A blind date at the fanciest restaurant in town?" Adrian smirked, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the table. "With you? It feels better than normal." The atmosphere at the table shifted, thickening with a soft, romantic tension. Emma felt a pull toward him, a magnetic gravity that was dangerous and thrilling. She found herself opening up about things she usually kept guarded. She told him about her childhood Christmases, about the specific scent of cinnamon and pine that reminded her of her grandmother. She confessed how she secretly hated the holidays now because they made her feel small and invisible in a world that demanded joy. "I know that feeling," Adrian said quietly. His voice had dropped an octave, intimate and rough. "Being in a room full of people and feeling like a ghost, like no one actually sees you, just what you can do for them." Emma looked at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his expression. For a man who looked like he could command an army, he looked incredibly lonely in that moment. When the waiter brought the bread basket, Adrian reached for it at the same time Emma did. His fingers brushed against the back of her hand. The contact was electric, sending a warm rush straight to her chest. She pulled her hand back slightly. Startled by the intensity of the sensation, Adrian did not pull away. He let his fingers linger near hers on the white tablecloth for a second longer than necessary. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up to her eyes, dark and searching. Emma struggled to maintain eye contact without blushing furiously. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. After they finished their espressos, Adrian checked his watch, a heavy, expensive piece of steel and glass. "Do you have to go?" Emma asked, surprised by how much she did not want the night to end. "No," Adrian said, signaling for the check. "But I thought we might take a walk. The Christmas market is just 2 blocks over. Unless you are cold?" "I would love that," Emma said quickly. They left the restaurant, and Emma noticed the 2 men in suits move as they moved. They did not follow immediately, but she saw them step out of the shadows near the entrance as Adrian held the door for her. "Is everything okay?" she asked, glancing back. Adrian placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her out into the crisp night air. "Fine, just ensuring we have some privacy." The statement was vague, but Emma forgot about it the moment the cold wind hit her face. Snow was falling in earnest now, large, fluffy flakes that caught the light of the street lamps. The city looked magical, covered in a fresh coat of white. They walked toward the market, the sound of the city muffled by the snow. Adrian adjusted his stride to match hers. He stayed on the street side of the sidewalk, his body acting as a shield against the wind and the traffic. Their shoulders brushed with every step, the contact sending fresh waves of warmth through her coat. The Christmas market was a kaleidoscope of string lights, wooden stalls, and the smell of roasted chestnuts. They wandered through the aisles, laughing at the terrible knitted sweaters on display and buying cups of rich, dark hot chocolate. Adrian seemed to shed layers of his seriousness here. He made a dry, sarcastic comment about a reindeer decoration that made Emma laugh so hard she almost spilled her drink. For the first time in months, Emma did not feel invisible. She felt vibrant. She felt alive. She felt the heavy weight of her loneliness dissolving under the heat of Adrian's attention. "Let's go down here," Adrian suggested, steering them away from the main crowd toward a quieter side street lined with closed storefronts. The noise of the market faded behind them. The street was lined with trees wrapped in twinkling white lights. It was incredibly romantic, like a scene from one of the movies Emma had planned to watch alone. They stopped in front of an antique shop window, the golden light from the display illuminating the falling snow around them. Adrian turned to face her. He took her cup of hot chocolate from her hand and set it on the window ledge, then gently took her gloved hands in his. Emma looked up at him, her breath hitching. He was so tall, blocking out the rest of the world. His face was serious again, but the hardness was gone, replaced by an intensity that made her knees weak. "I am glad you agreed to this." "Emma," he said softly. His thumb brushed over her knuckles through the wool of her gloves. "I am glad too," she whispered. "I was dreading tonight." "You should never dread Christmas," he murmured. He took a step closer. There was barely an inch of space between them now. Emma could smell his cologne, sandalwood, leather, and something crisp like winter air. Adrian slowly lifted one hand. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on the sensitive skin of her jaw. His hand was warm against the cold air. Emma leaned into the touch instinctively, her eyes fluttering shut for a moment. When she opened them, he was looking at her lips. The desire in his gaze was naked and potent. He hesitated, his hand sliding down to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The moment stretched, charged with a silence that screamed of anticipation. Emma stopped breathing. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted it more than she had wanted anything in a long time. He began to lean in, his head tilting, his eyelids lowering. Crash. The sound shattered the night like a physical blow. It came from the alleyway just 10 feet to their left, the sound of glass breaking violently and a guttural shout of anger. "Get back!" someone screamed from the darkness. Adrian's demeanor shifted instantly. The tenderness evaporated, replaced by a terrifying sharpness. His eyes snapped open, hard and alert, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. He did not look fearful. He looked lethal. In the blink of an eye, he stepped in front of Emma, placing his body between her and the alley. One of the men from the restaurant appeared seemingly out of thin air. He stepped out of the shadows of the storefront, moving with a speed that was unnatural. He was speaking into a small microphone tucked into his collar. "Boss, we need to move. Now." The man's voice was low, urgent, and devoid of panic. Adrian nodded once, sharp and commanding. He turned to Emma. His hand, which had been caressing her cheek moments ago, now gripped her arm firmly. It wasn't painful, but it was authoritative. He placed his other hand flat against the small of her back, pushing her forward. "We are leaving," Adrian said. His voice was no longer the cello. It was steel. "What? What is happening?" Emma stammered, trying to look toward the alley, but Adrian blocked her view completely. "Just a disturbance. Nothing for you to worry about, but we need to get you home." He ushered her down the street, his pace brisk. Emma had to half-jog to keep up with his long strides in her heels. The romantic bubble had popped, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and confusion. She saw a black SUV pull up to the curb seconds later. The second man from the restaurant was driving. Adrian opened the back door for her, checking the street in both directions with that same predatory intensity she had seen earlier. The drive to her apartment was silent. Adrian sat close to her, his body tense, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors and the windows. He did not explain what had happened. He did not apologize for the abrupt end to the evening. He seemed to be calculating something, his mind miles away. When they pulled up to her building, Emma felt a wash of disappointment mixed with unease. Thank you for dinner," she said, her hand on the door handle. Adrian blinked, as if remembering she was there. His expression softened, the mask of the businessman, or whatever he was, slipping back into place. "Emma," he turned to her, his gaze intense. "I apologize for the interruption. Riverton can be unpredictable at night. It's okay. She lied." He got out and walked her to the front door of her building. The snow was falling harder now, covering the sidewalk in a pristine blanket. At the door, he stopped. He did not lean in for a kiss this time. The moment had passed, stolen by the noise in the alley, but he looked at her with a lingering, heavy regret. "Get inside, safe," he said. "Lock your door." "Okay," she whispered. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It was a brief hug, but he held her tightly, his hand pressing the back of her head against his chest for a fleeting second. She could feel the heat radiating off him, the solid, unyielding strength of his frame. It felt protective. It felt dangerous. Then he pulled away, turned, and walked back to the waiting SUV without looking back. Emma stood in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear into the snowy night. She touched her cheek where his hand had rested, feeling the phantom warmth. Her heart was racing, torn between the thrill of the connection and a gnawing, unsettled feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had wanted a Christmas distraction, but as she turned her key in the lock, she had the distinct feeling she had stepped into something far more complicated than a blind date. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Emma Brooks's apartment, casting striped shadows across her duvet. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, her mind a chaotic reel of the previous night. She replayed the scene at the Christmas market over and over again. The way the snow had caught in Adrian's dark hair, the roughness of his thumb against her cheek, and the terrifying speed with which his demeanor had shifted from tenderness to lethal alertness. It was a dissonance she could not quite reconcile. There was the Adrian who had laughed at the ugly sweaters, whose eyes had softened when she spoke about her grandmother. That man made her feel safe, seen, and undeniably desired. Then there was the Adrian who had stood between her and the alleyway, his body a rigid wall of muscle, commanding men who appeared from the shadows like ghosts. That man made her feel unsettled. She rolled over, reaching for her phone on the nightstand. It was Christmas morning, but the usual barrage of Merry Christmas texts from distant relatives was buried under a single notification that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a number she did not have saved, but she knew immediately who it was. "Emma. Thank you for last night. I apologize again for the abrupt ending. I would very much like to make it up to you. Are you free for dinner tonight?" Adrian Emma bit her lip, her thumb hovering over the screen. It was polite, controlled, and direct, just like him. A sensible part of her brain told her to be cautious. Normal dates did not end with security details and emergency extractions from public streets. But another part of her, the part that was tired of the silence in her apartment and the ache of loneliness, remembered the way his hand had felt on the small of her back. She typed a reply before she could talk herself out of it. "I would like that." When Emma arrived at the office the next day, the holiday lull was in full effect. The few employees who were working between Christmas and New Year were moving at half speed, but Lily was vibrating with energy. As soon as Emma sat down at her desk, Lily rolled her chair over, holding a mug of coffee like a microphone. "Tell me everything," Lily demanded. "Do not leave out a single detail." "Was it awful? Did you escape through a bathroom window? Or do I need to buy a hat for the wedding?" Emma laughed, booting up her computer. "It was not awful, it was intense. Intense is good," Lily said, her eyes widening. "Intense is very good. Is he as handsome as Sarah said?" "He is," Emma admitted, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks. "He's incredibly charming. But Lily, it was a little strange. He had security." Lily waved a hand dismissively. "Of course he had security. The man is kind of a big deal." "Emma, what does that mean?" "Exactly?" Emma asked, swiveling her chair to face her friend. "You said he was in business. What kind of business requires bodyguards at a Christmas market?" Lily shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "Big money business. Sarah said the Costa family has been prominent in Riverton for 50 years. Old money. They own half the shipping yards, construction firms, real estate. You know, the boring stuff that makes billions. Rich people are paranoid. They probably have kidnapping insurance. Emma nodded slowly, but the explanation felt thin. It did not explain the look in Adrian's eyes when that bottle crashed. That was not the look of a paranoid businessman. It was the look of a soldier. When Lily drifted back to her desk, Emma opened a new browser tab. She hesitated for a moment, the cursor blinking in the search bar, before typing Adrian Costa Riverton. The first few results were polished and pristine. There were articles from the local business journal profiling the Costa Group and their recent investments in downtown revitalization. There were photos of Adrian at charity galas, looking tuxedo-clad and untouchable, shaking hands with the mayor. There was a piece about his foundation donating a new wing to the Children's Hospital. It all looked legitimate. It all looked perfect. Emma scrolled down to the bottom of the second page. The links here were different. They were forum discussions and archived threads from local news blogs. The headlines were less flattering. Union boss disappearance linked to Costa Syndicate? Riverton's Shadow Kings, the Costa family history. Who really runs the docks? She clicked on a forum link. The comments were a mess of speculation and conspiracy theories, but a few phrases appeared repeatedly. Organized crime, racketeering, the syndicate. One user had posted a grainy photo of a warehouse fire from 5 years ago, claiming it was a message sent by Adrian's father to a rival faction. Emma sat back in her chair, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Rumors were just rumors. The internet was full of people with active imaginations, but she could not shake the image of the men in suits standing by the door at Marino's, watching the room with predatory focus. She closed the tab quickly when her boss walked by, but the words Costa Syndicate burned in her mind for the rest of the day. That evening, Adrian picked the location. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Marino's. He sent a car for her, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, and the driver took her to the edge of town, to a small Italian restaurant called Luigi's. From the outside, it looked unassuming, with a faded awning and a simple neon sign inside. However, the air was rich with the smell of simmering tomato sauce and fresh basil. It was cozy, dimly lit, and felt incredibly private. Emma spotted Adrian immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, wearing a black turtleneck and a dark wool coat draped over the back of his chair. He looked less like a corporate titan tonight and more like something out of a classic film, dark, brooding, and undeniably dangerous. As she approached the table, she scanned the room. She saw them. 2 men, different from the ones on Christmas Eve, but wearing the same cut of suit, were seated at the bar near the entrance. They were not eating. They were drinking sparkling water and watching the door. "Emma," Adrian said, standing as she reached the table. He did not offer a handshake this time. Instead, he placed a hand gently on her shoulder and kissed her cheek. His stubble grazed her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. "You look beautiful," he murmured. "Thank you," she said, taking her seat. "This place is cozy. The food is better than Marino's," Adrian promised, sitting across from her. "My grandmother used to cook with the owner's mother. It is the only place in the city where I can get a decent risotto." The waiter arrived with a bottle of wine that Adrian had evidently already selected. He poured 2 glasses without asking, his movements fluid and practiced. "So," Emma began, taking a sip of the rich red wine to steady her nerves, "I did some reading today." Adrian paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. "Did you?" "I was curious," she said, trying to keep her tone light but watching his reaction closely. "You are quite the philanthropist. The hospital wing, the downtown project." He took a sip, his eyes never leaving hers. "I believe in giving back to the city that built us. I also saw some other things," Emma ventured, "less official things." Adrian set his glass down slowly. The silence that settled over the table was heavy. His face remained impassive, but the warmth in his eyes cooled by a few degrees. "The internet is a vast place, Emma," he said, his voice smooth but guarded. "People love to tell stories about families like mine. We have been successful for a long time. Success breeds envy, and envy breeds rumors. Is that all they are?" Emma asked softly. "Rumors? Because I see those men by the door, Adrian, and I saw how you reacted the other night. You do not seem like a man who is just successful. You seem like a man who is waiting for a fight." Adrian looked at the men by the bar, then back to Emma. His expression darkened, a flicker of something weary passing behind his eyes. "I am a man who has a lot of responsibilities," he said carefully. "And in my line of work, protection is a necessity, not a luxury. I have competitors who are not as principled as I am. I ensure that the people around me are safe. That is all you need to know." It was an evasion, a smooth, practiced evasion, but the way he looked at her, with a sudden, raw intensity, made the questions die in her throat. "Are you safe?" she asked instead. "I am safer when I am careful," he said. "And tonight, I just want to be Adrian, not the businessman, not the donor, not the rumors. Just a man having dinner with a woman he cannot stop thinking about." The admission hung in the air, stripping away the tension and replacing it with something far more volatile. Emma felt her breath hitch. The danger was still there, lurking in the periphery, but the pull toward him was overwhelming. They ate, and the conversation shifted. Adrian asked about her art, about the specific projects she was passionate about. He listened with that same intense focus that made her feel like the only person in the world. They laughed over stories of her college disasters and his strict upbringing. For an hour, the shadows receded. When they finished, Adrian walked her to her car. She had insisted on driving herself to the restaurant this time, needing the option of an escape route, though she had not used it. The parking lot was quiet, the air biting cold, their breath puffed out in white clouds between them. The snow from the previous days had been shoveled into high piles at the edge of the lot, glistening under the street lamps. They stopped beside her sedan. The tension that had been simmering all through dinner spiked, thick and electric. Adrian stepped closer. He did not crowd her, but he invaded her personal space with a confidence that made her heart race. He looked down at her, his hands buried in the pockets of his coat. "I meant what I said inside," he said, his voice low and raspy in the cold air. "About the risotto?" Emma teased weakly, trying to diffuse the charge in the air. "About not being able to stop thinking about you," he corrected. He took one hand out of his pocket and reached for her. His fingers brushed along the line of her jaw, his touch searing even in the freezing temperature. He tilted her chin up gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I tried to stay away today, Emma," he confessed, his thumb sweeping over her cheekbone. "I told myself it was a bad idea, that my life is too complicated, but then you texted back." Emma felt her legs tremble. "I am glad I did." Adrian lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, when she rose slightly on her toes to meet him, he closed the distance. His lips met hers, slow and deliberate. It was not a tentative first kiss. It was a claim. It was firm and warm, tasting of red wine and espresso. Emma gasped softly against his mouth, and he used the opportunity to deepen the kiss, his other hand coming out of his pocket to rest warmly at her waist. He drew her closer, pulling her body against his until there was no space left between them. Emma's hands found the front of his wool coat, clutching the lapels to anchor herself. She could feel the firmness of his chest beneath the layers, the solid, unyielding wall of him. His hand at her waist tightened, his fingers splaying possessively over the curve of her hip. The kiss grew more intense, his lips moving against hers with a controlled hunger that made her head spin. She felt his steady heartbeat against her palms, a rhythmic thud that matched the racing of her own. For a moment, the world dissolved. There were no rumors, no bodyguards, no cold wind. There was just the heat of his mouth, the scent of his skin, and the overwhelming realization that she was falling into something deep and terrifyingly fast. Adrian pulled back a fraction of an inch, his forehead resting against hers. He was breathing heavily, his eyes searching her face as if he were trying to memorize every feature. "Emma," he whispered, his voice rough. Before she could respond, the sound of a screeching engine tore through the silence. It was followed instantly by the smash of glass shattering against brick. Adrian moved before Emma could even process the noise. He shoved her behind him, his body shielding hers completely. The romantic haze vanished, replaced by cold, hard instinct. "Stay down," he commanded. Across the street, a dark sedan was speeding away, tires smoking against the asphalt. On the wall of the restaurant, just 10 yards from where they stood, a bottle had smashed, leaving a dark, dripping stain on the stucco. Adrian's men were there in seconds. One of them, a burly man with a scar on his chin, pushed Adrian further back toward the cars, while the other had a weapon drawn, not pointed, but held low and ready, scanning the street. "Clear," the man with the gun barked. "They are gone." Adrian straightened, his chest heaving. He looked at the retreating taillights of the dark car, and Emma saw him curse under his breath. A string of Italian words she did not understand, delivered with venom. She looked at his face and froze. The man who had just kissed her with such tenderness was gone. In his place was a stranger with eyes blazing with a dangerous edge, a cold, calculated fury that was far more terrifying than the shouting had been. Adrian turned to her, the fury instantly masked, though his jaw remained tight. "Get in the car," he ordered, not unkindly, but with zero room for argument. "My car is here. I can—" Emma started, her voice shaking. "You are not driving." He cut her off. "You are coming with me. I am taking you home." He opened the passenger door of her car, realized his mistake, and grabbed her hand, pulling her toward his waiting black sedan instead. One of his men jumped into the driver's seat of Adrian's car, while the other moved toward Emma's car to follow them. Inside the vehicle, the silence was suffocating. Adrian sat close to her, his body rigid. He reached out and placed his hand on her knee. It was a possessive gesture, heavy and firm. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low and steady, though his eyes were still fixed on the road ahead. "That should not have happened. Who was that?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Were they targeting you?" "It was a mistake." Adrian lied. She knew it was a lie. He knew she knew. Just drunk kids. "But I am not taking chances." He squeezed her knee gently. "You are safe with me. Emma, I promise you, I will never let anything happen to you." Emma looked at his hand on her knee, seeing the white knuckles, the tension in his tendons. She felt a confusing mix of emotions. She felt comforted by his presence, by the undeniable fact that he would tear the world apart to protect her. But she was also rattled to her core. The bottle, the speed of his men, the gun she was almost certain she had seen. This was not normal. This was not safe. When they arrived at her apartment building, Adrian walked her to the door, flanked by one of his guards. He waited until she was inside the lobby, until he heard the lock click. He did not kiss her again. He just nodded, his face grim, and turned back to the night. Upstairs. Emma locked her door and engaged the deadbolt. She walked to her living room and sank onto the couch without turning on the lights. The street lamps outside cast long, distorted shadows across the floor. She lifted her fingers to her lips. They still tingled from the pressure of his mouth. She could still taste him. She closed her eyes, and the feeling of his body against hers came rushing back. The heat, the strength, the overwhelming attraction. But then the sound of the shattering glass played in her mind. The look in his eyes, that blaze of violence. Emma sat alone in the dark, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. She was falling for Adrian Costa. She knew that, but she also knew, with a sinking dread, that the man she was drawn to was entangled in something dark, violent and inescapable. She was standing on the edge of a precipice, and she wasn't sure if she was about to step back or jump. The fluorescent lights of the design firm hummed with a low, persistent buzz that usually drove Emma crazy, but today she barely noticed it. The office was in that strange, suspended state between Christmas and New Year, where deadlines felt imaginary and half the desks were empty. Emma sat at her workstation, staring at a half-finished logo for a local bakery, but her mind was miles away. It was stuck on a snowy street corner, replaying the sensation of a rough hand against her cheek and the sound of shattering glass. "Emma!" Lily's voice cut through the fog. Emma swiveled her chair around just as a delivery courier placed a large, heavy arrangement on the edge of her desk. It was not the standard, generic bouquet of red roses one might expect from a supermarket. It was an architectural masterpiece of winter flora, white amaryllis, eucalyptus, sprigs of holly with bright berries, and velvety white roses, all arranged in a heavy, frosted glass vase. "Oh my God," Lily breathed, leaning over the partition. "Who is that from? Wait, do not tell me. It is the mystery man." Emma felt her face heat up as heads turned. She reached for the small envelope tucked into the greenery. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out the card. The handwriting was thick, angular, and decisive. "Thank you for making this Christmas feel different. I usually detest the holiday, but you made the silence bearable. I hope I did not scare you away. I would very much like to see you again." There was a postscript scribbled at the bottom, the ink slightly lighter, as if he had hesitated before adding it. "You make me feel calm. I have not felt that in a long time." Emma read the line 3 times. "You make me feel calm." It was such a simple admission, yet coming from a man who seemed to carry a storm inside him. It felt heavy. It felt intimate. Lily was practically vibrating. "Read it." "What does it say? It just says thank you." Emma lied, tucking the card quickly into her purse. Lily raised an eyebrow. "That is a $500 arrangement. Emma, that does not say, thanks for the date. That says, I am obsessed with you." Emma turned back to her screen, trying to ignore the scent of fresh pine and eucalyptus wafting from the flowers. She wanted to be thrilled. Part of her was thrilled. But beneath the flutter of excitement, the cold knot of anxiety remained. That evening, the anxiety tightened into nausea. Emma was curled up on her sofa, a mug of tea cooling in her hands, watching the local 10 o'clock news. She usually used the noise as background company, but a breaking news banner caught her attention. "Arson suspected in waterfront warehouse blaze." The screen cut to shaky footage of a massive structure engulfed in flames against the night sky. Fire trucks surrounded the perimeter, their sirens wailing. The reporter, bundled in a thick coat, stood in front of the inferno, shouting over the roar of the fire. Authorities are still battling the blaze at the storage facility in the industrial district. The reporter said, "While no injuries have been reported, sources indicate this warehouse was a key distribution point for several local import businesses. Police have not ruled out gang activity, citing recent tensions in the area. There is speculation of possible ties to the Costa family, though no official statement has been released." Emma froze. The tea in her mug rippled as her hand shook. Possible ties to the Costa family? It wasn't a message board rumor anymore. It was on the nightly news. She stared at the flames on the screen, and suddenly, the image of Adrian's face from the other night superimposed itself over the fire. She saw the way his jaw had clenched, the cold, lethal light in his eyes when the bottle had smashed. She remembered his vague answers about his business, his men, his need for protection. He wasn't just a businessman with enemies. He was part of this. The fires, the violence, the men in suits, it was all real. She grabbed her phone. She needed to know. She couldn't keep living in this halfway state of denial and desire. She typed out a text to Adrian, her fingers flying before she could second-guess herself. "We need to talk. Coffee. Tomorrow at noon. The Grind on 5th. She chose the location deliberately. The Grind was the busiest cafe in Riverton. It was loud, public, and well-lit. If she was going to confront a man who might be a mob boss, she was not going to do it in a romantic, dimly lit Italian restaurant. His reply came 2 minutes later. "I will be there." The next day. The cafe was packed with the lunch rush. The air smelled of roasted beans and wet wool. Emma secured a small table near the window and waited, clutching her cup of black coffee like a lifeline. When Adrian walked in, the atmosphere seemed to shift. He wore a camel-colored overcoat over a dark suit, looking impeccably expensive and out of place among the students and freelancers hunched over laptops. He scanned the room, spotted her, and moved through the crowd with a fluid grace that parted people without him ever having to touch them. He sat down opposite her, not taking off his coat. He did not smile. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes that she hadn't noticed before, and a tightness around his mouth. "Emma," he said, his voice low. Emma looked at him, trying to find the monster the news report had hinted at. She just saw a man who looked exhausted. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice stiff. "I assume this is not a social call," Adrian said. He glanced at her hands, wrapped white-knuckled around her mug. "You look like you're ready to run." "I saw the news last night," Emma said. She didn't want to dance around it. She wanted the truth. Adrian didn't flinch. "The warehouse, they mentioned your name, your family's name. They often do," Adrian said calmly. "Anything that happens on the waterfront gets pinned to the Costa name. It sells newspapers. Is it true?" Emma asked. She leaned forward, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper. "I am done with the vague answers. Adrian, I am done with the security for VIP's excuse. I need you to tell me the truth. Does the name Costa Syndicate mean anything to you?" The silence that followed was deafening. Despite the clatter of cups and chatter around them, Adrian looked at her for a long time. He seemed to be weighing something, perhaps the cost of a lie against the danger of the truth. Finally, his mask slipped. The polished, controlled businessman dissolved, leaving behind a raw, weary vulnerability that made Emma's heart ache despite her fear. "Yes," he said softly. Emma let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It felt like a physical blow. "My father built this family's influence on things that were not legal," Adrian said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Gambling, loans, protection, that was the foundation. When he died, I inherited all of it. The real estate, the shipping, the legitimate empire, and the other side, the syndicate." He looked down at his hands, which were clasped on the table. "I have spent the last 5 years trying to legitimize it. Emma, I have moved 80% of our assets into clean investments. I am trying to wash the blood out of the money. But you cannot just walk away from history. There are people, rivals, old associates who do not want things to change. They want the old ways. They want war." "The men I saw," Emma whispered, "they are soldiers," Adrian admitted. "They are there because there is a price on my head. Because Marco Velas, a man who used to work for my father, thinks I am weak for trying to go straight. He is the one burning warehouses. He's the one testing my defenses." Emma sat back, her chest feeling tight, as if a heavy weight had settled on her ribs. Hearing him say it plainly, soldiers, price on my head, war, made it real in a way that was terrifying. "So you are a mob boss," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I am a man trying to survive his inheritance," Adrian corrected, his eyes fierce. "But yes, to the world, to the police. That is what I am." Emma shook her head, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "I can't do this. Adrian flinched, as if she had slapped him. "I am a graphic designer," Emma said, her voice trembling. "My biggest stress is supposed to be a client who doesn't like the font I chose. I go to work. I come home. I watch movies. I wanted a Christmas date. I wanted something simple. I did not sign up for guns and arson and bodyguards. I know," Adrian said. He leaned forward, his urgency cutting through his composure. "I know you didn't, and I should have walked away the moment I met you. I knew I had no right to bring someone like you into my orbit. Then why did you?" Emma demanded, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "Because for 2 hours at dinner, I forgot who I was," Adrian said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Because when I am with you, I do not feel like I am waiting for a bullet. I was selfish. I am sorry." Emma stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor, drawing a few glances. She couldn't sit there anymore. She couldn't look at his dark, pleading eyes and feel her resolve crumble. "I need space," she said, clutching her purse. I need to not see you. I can't be part of this world. Adrian, I just can't." "Emma." Adrian started to stand, reaching for her hand. "Please," she said, backing away. "Don't follow me. Just let me go." She turned and walked out of the cafe, stepping into the biting cold of the afternoon. She didn't look back, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back until she turned the corner. That night, Emma's apartment felt more like a fortress than a home. She had checked the window locks 3 times. She had wedged a chair under the handle of the front door, a trick she had seen in movies that felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. She tried to read a book. She tried to clean the kitchen. But every sound, the settling of the building, the hum of the radiator, made her jump. Adrian's confession replayed in her mind on a loop. I am trying to wash the blood out of the money. He hadn't lied. He hadn't tried to manipulate her. He had told her the ugly, dangerous truth, and oddly, that made her miss him more. She missed the connection they had, the undeniable pull. But logic told her that connection was a death wish. It was just past 11 o'clock when she heard it. Click. It was the sound of the metal cover on her peephole sliding. Emma froze in the middle of her living room. The hallway light outside her apartment was on a timer. It should have been bright coming through the crack under the door. But suddenly, the strip of light was blocked by a shadow. Someone was standing directly in front of her door. The doorknob rattled. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a slow, testing turn of the handle. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. She backed away, grabbing her phone from the counter. Her fingers fumbled as she dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Someone is at my door, Emma whispered, retreating into her bedroom and locking that door too. Someone is trying to get in. Is the person inside the apartment? Ma'am? No, they are outside. They are trying the handle. Please, hurry. We have a unit in the area. Stay on the line. The rattling stopped. For 2 agonizing minutes, there was silence. Emma held her breath, listening. Had they left? Were they picking the lock? By the time the police arrived, 2 uniformed officers who looked bored and tired, the hallway was empty. There is nobody here, ma'am, the older officer said, shining his flashlight down the stairwell. Probably just a drunk neighbor at the wrong floor. It happens a lot during the holidays. No, Emma insisted, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. It wasn't a mistake. They covered the peephole. The officer shrugged. Well, there is no sign of forced entry. Just keep your door locked. Call us if they come back. They turned to leave. As the officer stepped away from the doormat, his boot kicked something. What is this? He muttered. He bent down and picked up a small, folded piece of paper that had been slid halfway under the door. He handed it to Emma. Looks like a love note, he joked dryly. Emma took the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unfold it. Inside, scrawled in black marker, were 4 words. Stay away from Costa. The police took a report, but their attitude changed little. It was just a note. No threat of violence, no specific name signed. They called it harassment and told her to file a report at the station in the morning. When they left, Emma stood alone in her apartment, the piece of paper sitting on her kitchen counter like a radioactive object. She was terrified. She was exposed. The lock on her door felt like cardboard. She didn't think, she just reacted. She scrolled to Adrian's name in her contacts and hit call. He picked up on the first ring. Emma? Someone was here. She sobbed, the fear finally breaking through her shock. They left a note. They know where I live. Adrian, I am coming. The line went dead. 12 minutes later, there was a pounding on her door. It was rhythmic and urgent. Emma, open the door. It is me. Emma scrambled to move the chair she had wedged back under the handle and unlocked the deadbolt. Adrian burst into the room. He was still wearing the suit from the coffee shop, but his tie was gone and his collar was unbuttoned. 2 of his men, the same ones from the restaurant, stood in the hallway, weapons clearly visible under their jackets, scanning the stairwell. Adrian kicked the door shut behind him and immediately grabbed Emma by the shoulders. His eyes were wild, scanning her face, her arms, checking for injuries. Did they touch you? Did you see them? He demanded. The calm, controlled businessman was gone. This was pure, unadulterated rage simmering beneath a thin veneer of discipline. No, Emma stammered, shaking. The note. She pointed to the counter. Adrian walked over and picked up the paper. He read the words, and the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He crushed the paper in his fist, his knuckles turning white. Velas. He growled. He turned back to Emma. You cannot stay here. What? Emma asked. He knows where you live. This was a warning. Next time it will not be paper. You are coming with me. Adrian, I can't. You want to argue about lifestyle later? Fine, Adrian snapped, crossing the room and grabbing her coat from the rack. But right now, you are in danger because of me. I am not leaving you here to be a target. Pack a bag. You are staying at my place tonight. There was no room for debate in his tone, and looking at the flimsy lock on her door, Emma didn't want to debate. She wanted to be safe, and the safest place in the world right now felt like it was standing right in front of her. She packed a bag in 3 minutes, throwing in pajamas and a change of clothes. Adrian stood by the door, his body blocking the entrance, his hand resting near his hip. They took the stairs, flanked by the guards. Adrian's black SUV was idling at the curb. They sped through the city streets, ignoring red lights, the silence in the car thick with tension. When they arrived at his building, it was a fortress of glass and steel in the city center. They drove into a private underground garage. Adrian guided her toward a private elevator, scanning the concrete shadows until the doors slid shut, sealing them inside. As the elevator began its smooth ascent to the penthouse, the adrenaline that had been fueling Emma began to curdle into something else. She looked at Adrian. He was staring at the floor indicator numbers, his jaw clenched so hard she thought his teeth might crack. He looked tormented. "Adrian," she whispered. He turned to her. His eyes were dark pools of guilt and fury. "I am so sorry, Emma," he rasped. "I swore I would keep you out of this." He looked so broken, so desperate to protect her, that the fear in Emma's chest transmuted instantly into something hot and overwhelming. She didn't see a mob boss. She saw a man who had driven across the city in 10 minutes to stand between her and the dark. She took a step toward him. He didn't hesitate. He closed the distance, burying his face in her neck, letting out a ragged, shuddering breath. "I thought I lost you," he murmured against her skin. Emma clutched the lapels of his coat, burying her face against his chest. She could smell the cold air clinging to him, mixed with his sandalwood cologne and the sharp scent of fear. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice muffled by his coat. Adrian pulled back just enough to look at her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and the restraint he had been holding onto snapped. He pressed her gently back against the paneled wall of the elevator. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones frantically. "Let me take care of you," he whispered. Then he kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss in the parking lot. This was desperate. It was a collision of fear and relief. Emma opened to him instantly, her hands tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. Adrian groaned low in his throat. One of his hands slid down to cradle the back of her head, protecting her from the wall, while the other settled firmly at her hip, pulling her body flush against his. He felt solid and immovable, a shield against the world outside. Emma melted into him, the terror of the last few hours washed away, replaced by a fierce, burning need to feel alive, to feel him. She felt the cold metal of his belt buckle against her stomach, the heat of his hands through her thin sweater. The elevator dinged softly, announcing their arrival at the penthouse, but neither of them moved. They stayed locked together, breathing each other's air, caught in the eye of the storm. For a moment, there was no syndicate, no notes, no police, just the desperate, undeniable fact that they belonged together, even if it was dangerous, especially because it was dangerous. Adrian pulled back slowly, his forehead resting against hers, his breathing ragged. "Come inside," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You are safe now." Emma nodded, breathless, and let him lead her out of the elevator and into his world. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, pneumatic hush, revealing a space that felt less like a home and more like a fortress of solitude suspended in the night sky. Adrian's penthouse was vast, a sprawling expanse of dark, polished wood, slate-gray stone, and walls of glass that offered an uninterrupted, panoramic view of Riverton. The city below was a grid of glittering gold and white lights, beautiful and distant. But inside, the air was cool and still. Emma stepped out, her boots clicking softly on the marble entryway. She wrapped her arms around herself, not because of the temperature, but because the sheer scale of the place was intimidating. It was immaculate. There were no piles of mail on the counter, no shoes kicked off by the door, no stray coffee mugs. It was a space designed for control, curated to perfection, and utterly devoid of the messy warmth that usually signaled a human life. "It is impressive," Emma said, her voice sounding small in the open-concept living area. "It is quiet," Adrian corrected. He walked past her, shedding his coat and tossing it onto a leather bench with a weary familiarity. "That is the only thing I care about." He moved into the kitchen, a sleek corridor of black granite and stainless steel, and began filling a kettle. Emma wandered further into the living room. The furniture was low and modern, upholstered in dark charcoal fabrics that looked expensive and uncomfortable. But as she turned the corner near the floor-to-ceiling window, she stopped. There, tucked awkwardly in the corner, was a Christmas tree. It was a modest thing, perhaps 6 feet tall, adorned with tasteful silver and blue ornaments that matched the room's color palette perfectly. It was beautiful, but it felt strangely sterile, like a display in a department store window. There were no gifts underneath it, no stray pine needles on the floor. "You have a tree," Emma said, surprised. Adrian looked over his shoulder, leaning against the kitchen island as the water heated. "My assistant insisted," he said, a note of embarrassment coloring his tone. "She said it was depressing to have a penthouse without one. She had a service set it up 2 weeks ago. I have not touched it since." Emma walked over to the tree and reached out, touching a cool glass ornament. It spun slowly on its hook. It made sense, she thought. A decoration installed by a service for a man who didn't have the time or the heart to celebrate. It broke her heart a little. "I can make you some tea," Adrian offered, breaking the silence. "Or something stronger?" "Tea is fine," Emma said, turning back to him. He nodded and disappeared down a hallway. A moment later, he returned holding a folded piece of black fabric. "You can sleep in the guest room," he said, handing her the cloth. "It is clean, the bathroom is en suite. There are fresh towels in the cabinet. This is, well, it is one of my t-shirts. I assumed you did not pack pajamas in 3 minutes. Thank you," Emma said, taking the shirt. The fabric was soft, high-quality cotton, and even holding it this far from her face, she could smell the faint, woodsy scent of his cologne clinging to the fibers. "I will be in the kitchen," Adrian said, turning back to the kettle. "Take your time." Emma retreated to the guest room. It was as hotel-like as the rest of the apartment, with crisp white linens and abstract art on the walls. The bathroom was spa-like, smelling of eucalyptus and stone. She stripped off her work clothes, which felt stiff and heavy after the chaos of the evening, and washed her face with warm water. As she dried her skin, she caught her reflection in the large, backlit mirror. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown slightly. Her cheeks were flushed a deep rose color, a stark contrast to her pale skin. She looked like someone who had just run a marathon. She pulled Adrian's t-shirt over her head. It was huge on her, the hem hitting mid-thigh, the sleeves hanging past her elbows. She breathed in, and the scent of sandalwood and leather filled her senses. It was intoxicating. She gripped the edge of the granite vanity, staring at herself. "You are in a mafia boss's house," she whispered to her reflection. "You are wearing his clothes. You are hiding from his enemies." It should have terrified her. The rational part of her brain, the part that paid taxes and obeyed traffic laws, was screaming that this was insanity. But the reflection in the mirror didn't look terrified. She looked alive. She looked like a woman who had finally woken up after years of sleepwalking. Her heart was racing, yes, but it wasn't just fear. It was the thrill of proximity to him. When she walked back out to the living room, the lights had been dimmed. The only illumination came from the city glow outside and a small lamp near the sofa. Adrian was sitting on one end of the massive leather couch, 2 mugs steaming on the coffee table in front of him. He had abandoned his suit jacket and tie, and his dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms marked with the faint ink of tattoos she couldn't quite make out. He looked up as she entered, and his gaze stalled. He swept his eyes over her, taking in the way his shirt draped over her frame, her bare legs, her damp hair. For a second, his expression was unguarded, pure, hungry appreciation. Then he blinked, and the mask of the gentleman slid back into place. "Come sit," he said, gesturing to the space beside him. "The tea is chamomile. It should help you sleep." Emma sat down, pulling her knees up to her chest and tucking the hem of the shirt around her legs. She reached for the mug, wrapping her cold hands around the hot ceramic. Adrian reached behind him and grabbed a throw blanket, a soft cashmere thing in charcoal gray. He draped it over her legs, his movements careful and respectful. When he sat back, he was close enough that his thigh brushed against her knee through the blanket. He didn't pull away. He rested his arm along the back of the sofa behind her, not touching her, but creating a protective enclosure. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the lights of Riverton twinkle below like a sea of fallen stars. "Is this what it is always like?" Emma asked softly, her voice barely rising above the hum of the refrigerator in the distance, the quiet, the isolation. "Most of the time," Adrian admitted. His voice was deep, rumbling in his chest, a vibration she could feel in the cushion beneath them. "It must be lonely," she said. "It is necessary," he countered. He took a sip of his tea, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "My father was a man who loved noise. He loved holding court. He filled our house with people, captains, politicians, business partners. There was always laughter, always music, always shouting. But the noise was a distraction. It was how he missed the knives coming for his back." Emma turned her head to look at him. His profile was sharp and severe in the half-light. "I was 16 when he was shot," Adrian said. He said it matter-of-factly, as if recounting a weather report. "It happened in our driveway. I was in the car with him. I saw what that noise, what that chaotic life actually cost when I took over. I promised myself I would never be that careless. I built this place to be a fortress. I cut the circle down to only the men I could trust with my life." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes filled with a haunting mixture of resolve and regret. "I inherited a kingdom of ashes, Emma." The syndicate was rotting from the inside. Violent, reckless, outdated. I have spent every day of the last 10 years trying to turn it into something else, something legitimate. I invested in construction, in tech, in shipping logistics. I tried to push the violence out, but the violence pushed back, Emma whispered, thinking of the warehouse fire. "Yes." Adrian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Old enemies like Velas. They look at me and they see a traitor. They see someone who thinks he is better than the street. They want the old days back. They want the blood, and they will burn down half the city to get it." Emma listened, her heart aching. She had seen the news reports, the rumors of the monster, but sitting here, thighs touching in the dark, she didn't see a monster. She saw a boy who had been forced to grow up in a war zone and was now a man desperately trying to keep the war from consuming everything he touched. He wasn't evil. He was haunted. Without thinking, Emma reached out. She placed her hand over his where it rested on his knee. His skin was warm. Her thumb brushed over his knuckles, tracing the rough, scarred skin there. Adrian went perfectly still. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. His expression softened, the hard lines around his mouth relaxing into something that looked painfully like hope. "You are not your father," Emma said firmly. "You are trying to change things. That matters. It matters," Adrian said hoarsely. "But it is dangerous. And I never wanted you to see this part of my life. I wanted to be the man at the restaurant, the man who could just buy you dinner and make you laugh. You were that man," Emma said. "You are still that man. You are just complicated." Adrian let out a short, dry laugh. Complicated is a polite word for it. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. His grip was strong, swallowing her smaller hand. He squeezed it, as if testing to make sure she was real, that she wasn't a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and loneliness. Emma shifted. The movement was subtle, just a slight adjustment of her hips, but it brought her closer to him. Her knee pressed firmly against his thigh now. Adrian responded instantly. The arm that had been resting on the back of the sofa dropped to her shoulders. He slid his hand down her arm, his fingers trailing heat through the fabric of the t-shirt before settling firmly on her upper arm. He pulled her gently into his side. Emma went willingly. She let her head fall against his shoulder, inhaling the scent of him. She felt the tension leave his body, felt him exhale a long, shuddering breath as if he had been holding it for years. She turned her face up to his. He was watching her, his eyes dark and dilated. The longing in his gaze was so raw it took her breath away. It was a look of disbelief, as if he couldn't understand why she was still there, why she hadn't run screaming into the night. "Emma," he breathed. He leaned down. This time, there was no hesitation, but there was no rush either. It was a slow, gravitational pull. Their lips met. It was different from the kiss in the parking lot and the desperate collision in the elevator. This was slow. It was searching. It was a question asked in the silence of the room. Is this real? Can we have this? Emma's lips parted, inviting him in. Adrian tasted of chamomile and desire. He kissed her with a deep, aching tenderness that made her toes curl into the cushions. It was the kind of kiss that promised everything: protection, devotion, passion. Emma shifted again, turning her body fully toward him. She brought her free hand up to his neck, her fingers tangling in the short hair at the nape. The sensation of the soft bristles against her fingertips sent a jolt of electricity through her. Adrian made a low sound in his throat, a growl of approval. His hand moved from her arm to the small of her back. He applied a steady, firm pressure, urging her closer. "Come here," he murmured against her mouth. He guided her until she was partially in his lap. Her legs draped over his thighs. The shift in position changed everything. Suddenly, she could feel the hard wall of his chest pressed against her breasts, the heat of his body radiating through the thin layers of cotton. The kiss deepened, losing its tentative quality. It became hungry. Adrian's mouth moved over hers with a masterful rhythm, his tongue sweeping against hers, tasting, claiming. Emma felt her breathing grow shallow, her lungs struggling to catch air between the onslaught of sensation. She pressed herself closer, needing to eliminate every millimeter of space between them. She looped both arms around his neck, holding on as the world narrowed down to the feeling of his lips and the strength of his arms. Adrian's hand splayed wide against her spine, holding her upright, his fingers digging slightly into the fabric of the shirt. His other hand moved up, tracing the line of her throat, his thumb resting against the frantic pulse point in her neck. He broke the kiss, gasping for air, but he didn't pull away. He buried his face in the curve of her neck, his nose brushing the sensitive skin beneath her ear. Emma threw her head back, exposing more of her throat to him. She felt his hot breath against her skin, sending shivers racing down her spine. He kissed the spot just below her earlobe, a soft, wet, open-mouthed kiss that made her whimper. Then he trailed his lips down her jawline, seeking, worshipping. "Emma," he whispered, his voice ragged and hoarse, vibrating against her skin. "You do not have to stay. I can take the couch. I do not want to scare you." He was giving her an out, even now, with her in his lap and his blood likely boiling. He was putting her comfort first. Emma opened her eyes, staring up at the shadowed ceiling. She curled her fingers into his hair, gripping him tighter. "I am not scared," she whispered back. She felt him freeze against her neck. "I am tired of being afraid." "Adrian," she confessed, her voice trembling with the honesty of it. "I am tired of being lonely. I want to be here. With you." Adrian lifted his head. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with an intensity that might have been terrifying if she didn't feel the same fire burning in her own veins. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once I start, I am not sure I can stop wanting you. I am sure," she said. He didn't need to be told twice. He captured her mouth again, and this time, there was no holding back. The kiss was fervent, demanding, and utterly consuming. His hands roamed over her back, molding her body to his, exploring the curve of her spine and the softness of her waist. Emma met his passion with her own, her hands clutching at his shoulders, her body arching into his touch. The room grew hot. The silence was broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing and the soft friction of fabric. They moved together in a timeless rhythm, the emotional dam breaking, releasing weeks of loneliness and fear into a torrent of affection. For a long, suspended moment, they were just a man and a woman finding solace in the dark. But as Adrian's hand slid up her thigh, his thumb grazing the bare skin above her knee, he suddenly went rigid. He pulled back, tearing his mouth from hers with a visible effort. His chest was heaving, his forehead damp. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes tight. "Stop," he breathed, more to himself than to her. "We have to stop." Emma blinked, dazed, her lips swollen and tingling. "Why?" "Because," Adrian gasped, reaching up to cup her face with trembling hands. "Because you are terrified, and you are running on adrenaline, and I am not going to be the mistake you regret in the morning. I wouldn't—" Emma started. "You might," he said gently. He opened his eyes, looking at her with a depth of tenderness that made her chest ache. Us. It matters too much to me. I do not want our first night to be blurred by fear. I want you to choose me when the sun is up and the danger feels far away. Not just because I am the only person here." Emma looked at him, realizing he was right. She was high on fear and relief, and he was respecting her enough to protect her from herself. "Okay," she whispered, leaning forward to kiss his cheek. "Okay." He held her for a moment longer, just holding her, before helping her slide off his lap. "Go to bed, Emma," he said softly, smoothing her hair. "Lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I will be right out here." Emma stood on shaky legs. She looked at him one last time, disheveled, breathless, and devastatingly beautiful in the dim light, before turning and walking to the guest room. She crawled into the large, cold bed, pulling the duvet up to her chin. Her body was humming, her skin sensitive and alive. She felt frustrated. Yes, but mostly she felt cherished. She lay in the dark, listening to the silence of the penthouse. The door to her room was slightly ajar, casting a sliver of light across the carpet. 10 minutes later, she was just drifting into a restless sleep when she heard a voice. It was Adrian. He was in the living room, or perhaps his office down the hall. Emma strained to listen. The voice was low, but it wasn't the warm, hoarse whisper that had just unraveled her on the couch. It was cold. It was precise. It was devoid of humanity. "I want the footage from the street," Adrian was saying. "Yes, every angle." A pause. "No, do not bring him to me yet. Find out who paid him to deliver the note. Squeeze him until he talks. I do not care what you have to use." Another pause. The silence was heavy. "And tell Marco," Adrian continued, his voice dropping to a glacial, terrifying pitch, "that if he comes near her building again, I will burn his entire operation to the ground with him inside it. Is that clear?" Emma pulled the duvet tighter, a shiver running through her that had nothing to do with the cold. In the other room was the man who had held her with shaking hands, who had stopped because he respected her too much to take advantage of her fear. But on the phone was the head of the Costa Syndicate, ordering torture and promising death. As she closed her eyes, Emma realized with a sinking feeling that she couldn't have one without the other. If she wanted Adrian, she had to accept the ghost in the machine. And as she drifted into sleep, the echo of his cold, precise order followed her into her dreams. The smell of coffee was the first thing to penetrate Emma's consciousness, rich and dark, pulling her out of a deep, dreamless sleep. She blinked her eyes open, disoriented for a moment by the high ceilings and the unfamiliar gray light filtering through the sheer curtains. Then the memory of the previous night washed over her. The elevator, the desperate kiss, the feeling of Adrian's hand tangled in her hair. She sat up, pulling the duvet tighter around her. She was still wearing his t-shirt. The scent of sandalwood had faded slightly, replaced by the warmth of her own skin. But the fabric still felt like a claim. She padded barefoot out of the guest room and down the hallway. The penthouse was bathed in the pale, flat light of a winter morning. The city below looked peaceful from this height, a silent grid of snow-dusted rooftops. She found Adrian in the kitchen. He was standing by the stove, his back to her. He had abandoned the suit entirely. He was wearing dark sweatpants and a simple black t-shirt that fit him like a second skin. As he moved to flip something in a pan, the fabric stretched across his back, and Emma saw the dark, intricate lines curled around his biceps and disappeared under the sleeves, tattoos she had only felt the texture of in the dark. Adrian turned as she entered, sensing her presence. His hair was messy, falling over his forehead in a way that made him look younger, less like the imposing figure from the news reports. "Good morning," he said. His voice was rough with sleep, a low rumble that vibrated in Emma's chest. "Good morning," she replied, feeling a sudden, aching shyness. "I hope you are hungry," he said, gesturing to the stove with a spatula. "I am attempting pancakes, my mother's recipe, though I suspect she left out a crucial ingredient when she taught me, specifically so I would never be as good as her." Emma walked closer, peering into the pan. The pancake was a jagged, uneven shape that looked more like a map of a small country than a breakfast food. It was burnt on the edges and raw in the middle. "It looks interesting," Emma teased, leaning her hip against the counter. Adrian scoffed, though his eyes were dancing with amusement. "It is rustic. It is an artisanal, deconstructed pancake." He plated the disaster and handed it to her with a mug of coffee. As he passed the mug, his fingers brushed against hers. It was a deliberate, lingering touch. The heat of his skin sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the caffeine. They ate at the kitchen island, sitting on high stools. For 20 minutes, the heavy reality of the night before seemed to evaporate. They were just two people sharing a morning. Adrian told a story about trying to make breakfast for his sisters once and setting off the fire alarm, which summoned the entire security detail. "You really are bad at this," Emma laughed, flicking a pinch of flour that had settled on the counter at him. Adrian dodged the flour, smirking. "I have other talents. Domestic goddess is not on my resume." His smirk softened into a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and crinkled the corners. In the daylight, without the armor of his suit and the weight of his command, he looked breathtakingly human. He looked like a man who could be happy. Emma watched him, her heart squeezing. She wanted this. She wanted the burnt pancakes and the messy hair and the way he looked at her like she was the only sunrise worth seeing. But the illusion was fragile, and it shattered the moment the elevator dinged. Adrian's smile vanished instantly. His posture straightened, the easy domesticity replaced by a rigid alertness. He set his mug down with a sharp clink. A man stepped out of the elevator. It was not one of the guards from the night before. This man was older, with graying temples and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He held a tablet in his hand and looked apologetic, but urgent. "Boss," the man said, nodding respectfully to Emma before turning to Adrian, "we have an update on the note." Adrian stood up, walking around the island to meet him. "Speak. It is Velas," the man said. "We confirmed it through a contact in the docks. Marco put the word out yesterday. He's squeezing the suppliers, and now he is targeting you directly. He knows about the girl." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. The girl. That was what she was now. A leverage point, a liability. Adrian's jaw tightened. "What is the message? He thinks you have gone soft," the man continued, his voice low. "He thinks the legitimate businesses have made you weak. He wants you to release the shipping routes on the east side back to the old operation. Using her is his way of forcing your hand." Adrian was silent for a long moment. He didn't look at Emma. He looked at the floor, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "Double the detail at the warehouse," Adrian ordered, his voice cold and precise. "And tell the team to prep the safe house in Vermont." "Wait," Emma said. She stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. "The safe house?" she asked. Adrian turned to her. His face was closed off again, the vulnerability of the morning locked away behind a wall of steel. "You cannot go back to your apartment, Emma. It is not safe. Velas knows where you live. He knows who you are. Until I deal with this, you need to be somewhere he cannot find you. I will send 2 men with you to a property we have upstate. It is secure. Emma stared at him. He was discussing her life like she was a package that needed to be put in storage. I have a job. Adrian, she said, her voice rising. I have a life. I cannot just disappear to Vermont because you have a rival who wants shipping routes. It is not a request, Adrian said sharply. It is a necessity. I am not your property, Emma snapped. The older man looked uncomfortable and took a step back toward the elevator, sensing the volatility in the room. Adrian walked toward her, stopping just a foot away. You are not property. You are the target. Do you understand that? Marco Velas does not send notes because he wants to be pen pals. He hurts people. He kills people. I'm trying to keep you alive. I never asked for this, Emma shouted, tears of frustration springing to her eyes. I never asked to be part of a war. I agreed to a blind date. Adrian, I didn't sign up to be a pawn in a mafia power struggle. I know, Adrian roared back, the control finally snapping. He raked a hand through his hair, pacing away from her and then spinning back. Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I want to see you looking at me like I am a monster? I tried to walk away. Emma, I tried to build something clean, but you cannot just wash off history. I have people relying on me. Families, loyalties, if I just hand over the routes, Velas expands, more drugs, more violence, more death. It is not as simple as just quitting. Emma looked at him, seeing the trap he was in. He was a king trying to abdicate a throne that was chained to his ankles. You are playing both sides, she said, her voice shaking. You say you want a better life, but you are still ordering men around. You are still fighting wars. You are dragging me into the darkness with you. I'm trying to shield you from it, Adrian pleaded. Reaching for her hand, Emma pulled back. You can't shield me and hold on to that life at the same time. She looked around the penthouse, the beautiful, cold, immaculate prison. I can't stay here, she said quietly. I can't be a prisoner in a safe house. I need to be myself. If you leave this building, I cannot guarantee your safety, Adrian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. Then that is a risk I have to take, Emma said. Because staying here, letting you hide me, that kills me in a different way. She turned and walked toward the guest room to change back into her clothes. Adrian didn't follow her. When she came out, bag in hand, he was standing by the window, staring out at the city, his back rigid. I am going home, she said to his back. I will have my men drive you, he said without turning around, and they will sit outside your building. Do not try to send them away. Emma didn't argue. She walked to the elevator, her heart breaking with every step. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to press her face against his back and beg him to just be the man who made bad pancakes. But she knew that man was only half of who he was. The ride back to her apartment was silent. The guards dropped her off and parked their black SUV directly across the street, a constant, looming reminder of her reality. Emma spent the rest of the day in a haze of misery. Her apartment felt small and vulnerable. She jumped at every creak of the floorboards. She ignored her phone, which buzzed incessantly with messages from Adrian. Please just tell me you're inside. I am sorry. Let me send someone to bring you back. She didn't reply. She sat on her couch as the sun went down, holding the Christmas card he had sent her. You make me feel calm. She traced the handwriting with her finger. She loved him. God help her. She loved him. But love wasn't enough to stop bullets. The next morning, Emma went to work. She needed the routine. She needed to pretend that her biggest problem was a font choice. She took a cab, ignoring the black SUV that trailed her the entire way. It was just after lunch when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Thinking it might be a client, she answered, Hello? Hello? Emma. The voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly unfamiliar. It wasn't Adrian's rough baritone. It was lighter, with a chilling, mocking edge. Who is this? Emma asked, her grip tightening on the phone. A friend of a friend, the voice said. My name is Marco. Emma stopped breathing. The office around her, the clicking keyboards, the low chatter, seemed to fade into silence. What do you want? She whispered. I think you know what I want, Marco said pleasantly. Adrian is being stubborn. He's letting his pride get in the way of business. I hate to see that. It leads to unnecessary unpleasantness. Leave me alone, Emma said, her voice trembling. I would love to, Marco replied. But unfortunately, you are the only person Adrian seems to listen to these days. I know you leave work at 5. Emma, I know you take the side exit. I know your mother lives in Florida. It would be a shame if there were any holiday accidents this year. Roads are so slippery. Emma felt nausea roll in her stomach. He was threatening her mother. Stop, she begged. I want to make a deal, Marco said, and meet me. Talk to me. If you can convince your boyfriend to see reason, this all goes away. No wars, no accidents, just a peaceful Christmas. Where? Emma asked, her mind racing. The Christmas market in the square. Marco said, 4 o'clock. It is very public, very safe. I am not a monster. Emma, I just want to talk, and if I don't come, then I cannot promise that the next call won't be from a hospital. The line went dead. Emma lowered the phone, her hand shaking so hard she almost dropped it. She looked out the window. She could see Adrian's SUV parked down the block. If she told Adrian, he would storm the market. He would bring his soldiers. There would be a shootout in the middle of a crowd of families. People would die. But if she went alone, maybe she could fix this. Maybe she could just talk. It was a public place. Marco wouldn't try anything in front of hundreds of witnesses. She grabbed her coat. She slipped out the side exit of the building, moving quickly through the alley to avoid the main street where Adrian's men were watching the front doors. She walked to the market, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The city was festive. Snow was falling lightly, and speakers mounted on lampposts were playing Joy to the World. The market was crowded. Families were drinking cider. Children were running between the stalls. Couples were taking selfies. It was a scene of perfect holiday joy, and Emma felt like she was walking through a nightmare. She scanned the crowd, her breath puffing in white clouds. Emma. She turned. Standing near a stall selling wooden ornaments was a man. He was not what she expected. He was not a thug. He was dressed in a tailored camel coat and a cashmere scarf. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marco Velas. You came, he said, stepping closer. Smart girl. What do you want from Adrian? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Marco chuckled softly. I want what is mine. Territory. Respect. Things Adrian is throwing away because he wants to play at being a legitimate businessman. He stepped beside her, gripping her elbow. It looked like a gentleman guiding a lady, but his grip was iron hard. Walk with me, he said. We can talk here, Emma insisted, digging her heels in. Marco smiled, but his eyes were dead. We can... But see that man over there? The one in the gray jacket near the pretzels? Emma looked. A man was watching them. That is my associate. Marco said, and he has a very nervous trigger finger. If you cause a scene, he might panic, and there are so many children here. Emma felt sick. She let him guide her. He led her away from the main thoroughfare, toward the edge of the market where the crowds thinned out near the street. You are going to call Adrian, Marco explained as they walked. You are going to tell him that you are with me. And you are going to tell him that unless he hands over the deed to the Eastern warehouses tonight, you are going on a very long trip. I won't do it, Emma said. You will, Marco said smoothly. Or, he stopped. His head snapped to the right. Emma followed his gaze. Standing near a hot chocolate stand, about 20 feet away, was one of the men from Adrian's security detail, the one she had tried to evade at her office. He hadn't been fooled by the side exit. He had followed her. The guard's hand was already moving inside his jacket. Marco cursed. It happened in a blur. Marco shoved Emma forward. Hard, she stumbled, her boots slipping on the icy pavement. Take her, Marco shouted. The festive atmosphere shattered. Someone screamed. The crowd erupted into chaos, people scattering as the sight of men reaching for weapons registered. Emma scrambled to regain her balance, but hands grabbed her from behind. Rough hands. Not Adrian's hands. No, she screamed, thrashing. A black van screeched up to the curb, its side door sliding open. Emma saw Adrian's guard lunging through the crowd, his gun drawn now, shouting into his radio, but he was too far away. He was blocked by a fleeing family. She was lifted off her feet. The smell of exhaust and stale tobacco filled her nose. She kicked, connecting with a shin, but the man holding her didn't even grunt. She was thrown into the back of the van. Her head hit the floor mat with a stunning thud, knocking the breath from her lungs. The door slammed shut, sealing out the Christmas lights, the carols, and the world. As the van tires squealed against the pavement, throwing her against the metal wall, Emma had one final, terrifying thought as the city blurred away behind her. She had tried to stop the war. Instead, she had just become the weapon. The warehouse smelled of rust, brine, and old gasoline. It was a cavernous, hollow space located on the decaying edge of the Riverton docks, where the wind whipped off the water and cut through the cracks in the corrugated metal walls. Outside, the distant lights of the city reflected faintly on the black water, a cruel reminder of the holiday season, continuing without her. Emma sat in a wooden chair in the center of the vast concrete floor. Her wrists bound tightly behind her with plastic zip ties. The cold was seeping into her bones, numbing her fingers and toes, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her senses sharp. Marco Velas paced in front of her, his camel coat pristine against the grime of the surroundings. He looked bored, checking his watch as if waiting for a train. "He will come. You know," Marco said, stopping to look at her. "Adrian has always been predictable. He confuses sentimentality with honor. It is his fatal flaw." Emma shivered, but she kept her chin high. "He is not weak, Marco." "He's just better than you." Marco laughed, a sharp, barking sound that echoed in the empty space. "Better? He inherited an empire and turned it into a logistics company. He's ashamed of what he is. Tonight, I am going to take everything from him, and you, my dear, are the key. When he sees you here, freezing and terrified, he will sign over every route, every account, just to get you out." Emma looked at him, her fear transmuting into a cold, hard resolve. "You underestimate him," she said quietly, "and you underestimate what love makes people do. He won't just sign, he will fight." Across the city, in the penthouse that had been her sanctuary just 24 hours ago, Adrian Costa was staring at his phone. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a marble statue. The message from his guard had been brief and chaotic. They took her. Black van, heading south. Adrian didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone. He went perfectly, terrifyingly still. The panic that flared in his chest was instantly suffocated by a cold, ruthless determination. "Gear up," he said to the head of his security detail. "Every man, vests, sidearms. We're going to the old shipyard. I know Marco uses the derelict warehouses there." "We go in hot?" the guard asked. "Fast and clean," Adrian ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. "I want minimal casualties, but anyone who stands between me and her goes down." He walked to his desk, unlocking a drawer. He pulled out a heavy handgun and checked the magazine. Then he paused. He looked at the weapon, then at the photo of his father on the wall, the man who had lived by the gun and died by it. Adrian put the gun in his holster. Then he picked up his phone again. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago but never used. Detective Hayes. The voice on the other end was suspicious. "Who is this?" "It is Adrian Costa," he said. There was a pause. "Well, this is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure, Mr. Costa? Finally ready to confess? I am," Adrian said, and the silence on the line was profound. "I am sending you a location. Detective, Marco Velas is there. He has kidnapped a civilian, a woman named Emma Brooks. I am going in to get her. If you go in, Costa, it is a crime scene. I will have to arrest you. I know," Adrian said, his voice breaking slightly. "I will give you everything. Hayes, the books, the names, the history, all of it. Just bring your team, and make sure she gets out alive." He hung up, threw on his coat, and walked out the door. At the warehouse, the wait was agonizing. Marco's men, 4 of them, stood in the shadows, smoking and joking in low voices. Marco circled Emma like a shark, taunting her with details of how he would dismantle Adrian's legacy piece by piece. "He's a boy playing king," Marco sneered. "He thinks he can have it all. The power and the clean hands. Tonight, he learns that you have to choose." Emma didn't respond. She was listening. Over the moan of the wind, she heard it, the crunch of gravel, the hum of engines cutting off. Marco heard it too. He signaled to his men, who instantly spread out, taking cover behind crates and pillars. "Showtime," Marco whispered, pulling a silver pistol from his coat. The heavy metal doors of the warehouse groaned. Suddenly, headlights cut through the fog outside, blindingly bright beams shining through the gaps in the metal. "Police!" shouted a voice from the north side. Marco spun around. Police? That was not the plan. But before he could react, the main doors burst open with a crash. Adrian was there. He didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a force of nature. He was flanked by 3 of his own men, moving in a tight, tactical formation. "Adrian!" Emma screamed. Adrian's eyes found her instantly. The relief that washed over his face was so raw, it was painful to watch. But then he saw Marco, standing behind her, the gun pressed into the soft wool of her coat at her shoulder. "Drop it, Marco!" Adrian roared, his own weapon raised but wavering. Marco used Emma as a shield, pressing the barrel harder against her. "You brought the cops. Adrian, that is low, even for you. Let her go!" Adrian begged, his voice cracking. He took a step forward, raising his free hand. "I am here. This is between us. Let her walk out, and you can have whatever you want. The routes, the money, Mafia, I will sign it all over right now." Emma watched Adrian's face. He was terrified. The man who controlled millions of dollars, who commanded soldiers, was trembling because he thought he might lose her. "I don't want your money anymore," Marco spat. "I want to watch you bleed." Suddenly, the side windows shattered inward. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." Detective Hayes and her team swarmed the catwalks above. Caught between Adrian in front and the police above, Marco panicked. His eyes darted around, looking for an exit. Adrian saw the hesitation. "Now!" he shouted. Emma didn't need to be told. She threw her weight to the right, jerking her body violently. Marco's finger tightened on the trigger. Bang! The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Emma felt a searing heat across her upper arm, like a hot poker branding her skin. She cried out, falling to the concrete, chair and all. Adrian didn't wait. He lunged. He cleared the distance in 2 strides, tackling Marco with the force of a freight train. The 2 men hit the ground hard. The gun skittered away across the floor. It wasn't a choreographed fight. It was a desperate, ugly struggle. Adrian punched Marco, a guttural grunt of effort escaping him. Marco clawed at Adrian's face, landing a blow to his lip that split the skin. "Stay down!" Agents were screaming, swarming the floor. Adrian didn't hear them. He had Marco pinned. He raised his fist for another strike, his eyes blazing with a murderous fury. "Costa, don't do it!" Detective Hayes shouted, grabbing Adrian's shoulder. Adrian froze. He looked at his fist, then at Marco's bloodied face. Then he looked at Emma. She was lying on her side, still tied to the chair, clutching her arm. Blood was seeping through her coat. Adrian shoved Marco away. Scrambling off him, he crawled to Emma, his knees scraping against the rough concrete. "Emma," he gasped, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch her. "Oh God, Emma!" He pulled a knife from his belt and slashed the zip ties on her wrists. As soon as she was free, she reached for him. "I am okay," she sobbed. "It is just a scratch. I am okay." Paramedics were rushing in now, pushing Adrian aside to check the wound, but Adrian wouldn't leave. He knelt beside her, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb trembling uncontrollably as he wiped away her tears. Blood from his lip dripped onto his chin, but he didn't seem to notice. "I am so sorry," he choked out. I can't keep asking you to live in this darkness. Emma, I can't do this to you." Emma leaned into his touch, ignoring the stinging in her arm. She grabbed his wrist, holding him there. "I wasn't afraid of the gun." "Adrian," she whispered, her voice fierce. "I was afraid I would never see you again." Adrian closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against hers. A single tear tracked through the grime on his face. Later, the hospital was quiet. The chaos of the warehouse felt a lifetime away. Emma sat on the edge of a bed, her arm bandaged and in a sling. The door opened and Adrian walked in. He had been cleaned up, the blood wiped away, but his lip was swollen and purple. Detective Hayes stood behind him, looking solemn. Adrian walked over to the bed. He didn't sit. He stood like a man facing a firing squad. "I made a deal," he said softly. Emma looked at Hayes. "Mister?" "Costa has provided us with extensive documentation regarding the syndicate's operations," Hayes said formally. "Names, accounts, connections to Marco Velas. It is enough to dismantle the entire network. And?" Emma asked, looking back at Adrian. "And in exchange," Adrian said, his voice steady, "I am pleading guilty to racketeering and conspiracy. I am going to prison. Emma." Emma's heart stopped. "For how long?" "Not as long as he deserves," Hayes muttered, "but with his cooperation, a few years, maybe less with good behavior." Adrian reached out and took Emma's good hand. "It was the only way," he said, "to ensure Marco goes away forever, to ensure you are safe, and to ensure that when I come out, I am actually free. No more double life. No more shadows." Emma stood up. She ignored the pain in her arm and stepped into his space. "You did this for me?" she asked. "I did it for us," Adrian corrected. He wrapped his arms around her. Careful of her injury. "I love you, Emma. I love you more than the power. I love you more than the fear. This is the only way I can prove it." Snow began to fall outside the hospital window. Large, soft flakes drifting against the glass. Emma pressed her face into his chest. She felt his arms wrapped tightly around her, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "I will wait," she whispered into his shirt. Adrian let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He tilted her head back and kissed her. It wasn't a desperate kiss, or a hungry one. It was a kiss that tasted of surrender. It tasted of a promise kept. It was deep and aching, sealing a pact between them that no prison walls could break. 1 year later, the street was quiet, lined with brownstones dusted in fresh white powder. On the corner stood a small, warmly lit restaurant named the Riverton Bistro. It was intimate, unpretentious, and bustling with locals. Emma stood on the sidewalk, her breath misting in the cold air. She watched through the large front window. Inside, Adrian was wiping down a table. He was wearing a simple white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked different. The darkness that had clung to him like a second skin was gone. He looked tired. Yes, it was late, but his shoulders were relaxed. He said something to a family who was putting on their coats, and he smiled. It was a wide, genuine smile. He looked free. The last customers left, the bell above the door chiming. Adrian locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. Emma tapped on the glass. Adrian turned. His face lit up. He unlocked the door immediately, pulling her inside and out of the cold. "You are late," he teased, helping her out of her coat. "Traffic was a nightmare." She laughed. "And I had to stop to get this." She pulled a shiny red star out of her bag. "For the tree?" he asked, looking at the small, slightly lopsided evergreen standing in the corner of the dining room. "For the tree," she confirmed. They spent the next hour decorating. It was nothing like the immaculate, sterile tree in his penthouse. This one was chaotic and colorful, filled with ornaments Emma had collected over the years. Adrian fumbled with the string lights, getting them tangled in his own arms, swearing softly under his breath while Emma laughed until her sides hurt. "You are terrible at this," she teased, flicking a piece of tinsel at him. "I am out of practice," he defended, finally getting the lights to encircle the branches. He plugged them in. The tree lit up, casting a soft, multicolored glow over the empty restaurant. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. Adrian turned to her. The humor faded from his expression, replaced by a deep reverence. He stepped closer, pulling her into his arms. His hands rested at her waist, warm and heavy. Emma placed her palms flat against his chest, feeling the steady, calm rhythm of his heart. "Merry Christmas." "Adrian," she whispered. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he replied. He kissed her. It was slow and tender, bathed in the gentle light of the tree. There were no guards outside. There were no guns under the counter. There was just the smell of pine and the warmth of his body. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate. His hand slid up her back, pressing her closer, and Emma relaxed fully against him. She felt safe. Not the safety of a fortress, but the safety of a home. They broke apart slowly, resting their foreheads together. "Come here," Adrian murmured. He led her to the back doorway of the restaurant, opening it to the alleyway where the snow was falling silently. He wrapped his coat around both of them, pulling the wool tight to shield them from the wind. They stood there, huddled together, watching the city sleep. "You know," Adrian said quietly, his voice vibrating against her shoulder, "last Christmas, I was a ghost. I was walking through my own life, waiting for it to end." He tightened his arm around her. "This year, because of a blind date I tried to cancel 3 times, I finally feel alive." Emma smiled, tears pricking her eyes. She rested her head on his shoulder, watching the snow cover the cobblestones. It wasn't going to be easy. He was a felon on parole. She was the woman who loved him. They had a long road ahead. But standing there, wrapped in his warmth, she knew it was real. They chose this life. They chose each other. Adrian turned his head and kissed her temple. The story closed on them standing together in the doorway, embraced against the cold, sharing a quiet, lingering moment as the Christmas lights glowed behind them, and the life they had fought for began for real. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Emma and Adrian as much as I enjoyed writing it. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below sharing your country or city, and let me know what you thought of the ending. Did Adrian redeem himself? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional, thrilling, and romantic tales. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in English in the comments section. See you in the next story.